Welcome to the Cambridge Financial Podcast with Bert Salazar, CEO at Cambridge Financial Partners, LLC. This podcast is all about tax-preferred retirement planning, economics, financial risk management, and achieving a risk-free and successful financial life. Now, your host, Bert Salazar. Bert Salazar. Bert Salazar.
Hey, good day, everyone. Welcome to another podcast from your Tax-Free Life podcast. As always, I'm excited to be here with all of you, and this is episode 132. And the title for this episode is Taxation Without Representation. So I'm going to be discussing several points that I think are going to be very critical for all of you to pay attention to between now and the end of the year. Because we're fast approaching now the end of 2020. And thank God for that one, because it can't get any worse. Well, you never know, but it can't get any worse than what it is today. So once again, the title for this podcast is Taxation Without Representation. And by the way, for those of you that may not know this, that was one of the main topics in how the Civil War actually started. So it was one was slavery, and two was taxation without representation. I would argue it was number one was taxation without representation, and number two was slavery. But we don't have the time to go into some of those points there. But you know, we're 15 days away from the 2020 presidential election, so I would encourage each and every one of you to buckle up. Because things are going to be very tough. There's going to be a lot of volatility. The stock market is going to show some volatility along the way. And depending who wins the election now in November, obviously there may be or may not be a major impact in the stock market, your retirement accounts, your IRA accounts, your investments, and so forth. So make certain that, you know, from now until the end of the year, and even after past the election, try to become as conservative as you possibly can in your investments, because a lot of things are going to happen. And then obviously we got the issue with the pandemic, and you know, are we going to get a second wave? I know Europe is now getting a second wave, and they're actually closing many other countries in Europe because of the second wave. So you got to keep an eye on it. Who knows what's going to happen to the economy next year? Now, the third quarter numbers should be very positive from an economic standpoint, but we won't know what the fourth quarter numbers are going to look like until sometime in February of 2021. So be very careful with your investment dollars, especially if you're getting closer and closer to retirement. Remember the my red zone of retirement, which is 5 years preceding retirement, and then the first 5 years post-retirement, which I call the kill zone of retirement. So if you're within 5 years of retirement, make sure that your money is totally protected, because otherwise you may suffer some major losses that you may not be able to recover. And if you're already in retirement, that can be even worse, because you're going to have access to those accounts whether you make money or not, in order to maintain your standard of living. So I'm gonna take you down memory lane and kind of, you know, share some ideas with you that I think these are things that you got to keep in mind. Now, some of you may think, Bert, you know, every time we listen to one of your podcasts, you're being very negative and so forth. And I'm not trying to be negative, but I do try to be realistic as I possibly can, because, you know, I have been doing this now for almost 32 years. And because of the fact that I've been doing this for a long, long time, I've seen a lot of stuff happening. I've seen many of my clients with their retirement accounts, you know, being fully dissipated, and they're running out of money before they run out of life, because they came in to see me way too late in the game, and they really didn't do any proper planning in order to mitigate the future circumstances that they were going to more than likely have to deal with, or had to deal with at some point in time. Now, let me start by once again taking you down memory lane. And can you imagine taxes 20 years from now? Do you think they're going to be lower than they are today? Do you think they're going to be at the same level that they are today? Or do you think they're going to be higher than they are today? Now, last week we surpassed the $27 trillion in the national debt. The unfunded liabilities for Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, Medicare Part D, interest on the national debt, and the money that we owe other countries is now in excess of $155 trillion. Our national deficit, which is a difference between what the government brings in revenues and what we pay out, the deficit is at $3.1 trillion and counting. So imagine where taxes are going to have to be 20 years from now. So if you retire at 65, take a look at your life when you're in your mid-80s. Or if you retired at 55, like, many of the clients that I deal with have pensions and they're public safety employees and so forth, look at their lives 20 years from now. Even with a pension, more than likely inflation is going to eat away at your pension, and you're going to need additional funding to come in, and then those are going to provide all kinds of issues to you from a business standpoint. So when you imagine taxes 20 years from now, what would they look like? How high will they be? I would argue taxes are going to have to double in the next several years, or our country is going to go bankrupt. Now, the TCJA, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, will sunset December 31st of 2025. So the minute that you wake up on January 1, 2026, taxes are going to be higher. Now, obviously, how about 2030, 2035, 2040, 2045? And how old will you be then? And, how high will taxes be? How will you cope? Remember, if you have to pay more and more in taxes, that means you have to take more and more of your money out of your retirement accounts, because you can only live on the net. You don't live on the gross. So you got to take money out of your retirement accounts. You got to pay taxes at whatever bracket you're going to find yourself in at that point in time. And then you're going to be able to use the rest to try to make a living for yourself and your family. The other big question is what percentage of your retirement assets will be taxed? Unless you do proper planning, I would argue that almost 100% of all your retirement assets are going to be totally taxed. Of all the or 100% of all the assets that you have set for retirement are going to be taxed at some point in time in the future when you start taking distributions. And if taxes are to double, what percentage of your retirement assets would you like to have taxed? I would argue 0. But since you've done a lousy job and you don't know what to do, and your advisors are not teaching you and educating you and working with you and holding you by the hand, chances are you're going to be paying taxes on just about every dollar of retirement that you take out. How will taxes impact your standard of living? Once again, if you can only take so much, because now you fear running out of money before you run out of life, and now taxes are a lot higher for you and your family, are you going to have to reduce your standard of living? And to what level? Are you going to have to get below the poverty level in order to make ends meet? Is that what you forecasted for your retirement? Because I'm sure you all wanted to have a really good retirement life. And another big question is, when will you run out of money? See, if you're not having these discussions with your advisors, then you need to get a new advisor, because you're not dealing with someone that's being proactive. One of the things I'm certain of is I'm sure many of you have been dealing with advisors for many years. But how many times do you visit with your advisors on an annual basis? 4 times a year, quarterly? That would be ideal. 3 times a year, perhaps every 4 months, that would be fairly good as well. Twice a year, maybe every 6 months, that would be good. Once a year, that should be the bare minimum. But in today's environment and volatility and what we're going through, once a year used to be good enough at one point in time. Not anymore. Not anymore. By the way, how many times are these advisors reaching out to you? How many times are they inviting you to listen to their podcast so they can educate you as to what's going on in the economy and how to mitigate it? How many of them are putting out videos, for you to learn more from and to become self-educated and to assist you in understanding, topics and financial issues and concerns that may be keeping you awake at night? I would argue most of them are not doing that. Yet, you continue to be faithful to these advisors, and they're not taking you down memory lane. They're taking you down a lane that is going to get you very close to hell, whether you want to or not. So you really have to start thinking about, the company you keep from a financial standpoint, because, hey, it's only your life and it's your life. So if we want to throw it away, then be my guest. But I have no intention to do that with my clients. So every time I engage and do videos and do podcasts, and I do them on a weekly basis, I share that with each and every one of my clients and many of you on my online community, because I'm a true believer that information without education always, always, always leads to failure. So start thinking about some of those things. Now, so we've been going down memory lane and talking a little bit about taxes. Now let's go down memory lane and imagine inflation 20 years from now. Now, inflation is similar to those Social Security taxes that I call a torpedo tax. And I call inflation a torpedo tax because inflation is a tax, and inflation is not tax deductible, which means that by the time you figure it out, it's too late. When you look at inflation 20 years from now, one question is, well, how will it feel? And I used to get booklets every year, years ago. I can still go online and get them. And these were booklets that are called Remember When. And they would give you back the inflationary cost for the last, 10, 20, 30, 40 years, depending on which one you purchased, on many of the key items that all of us purchase, whether it's automobiles, homes, food, energy, gas prices, things that are so common to us. And it would take you down memory lane, and people would say, wow, I remember when I first bought my first car. I bought a brand new car, back in 1973 when I drove for the first time, and it was a brand new Monte Carlo, and I paid $3,200 for it. Now you go try to buy one of those today, and you're not going to be able to find it. So, when you take a walk down memory lane, it's going to have a major impact. So all of a sudden now you have taxes going through the roof, and now you have inflation, which is a silent killer. So just so you'll know, in 20 years from now, a $1 bill at 4% inflation will only be worth 47 cents. So $2 won't even buy what $1 used to purchase 20 years earlier. And how are you going to cope with that? And because of the fact that taxes are high and inflation is high, then you're not going to have any choice but to take more and more money out of your retirement accounts, because you need to stay ahead of inflation, because otherwise you're going to lose in 20 years. You're going to lose 53 cents of purchasing power out of every dollar. And on top of that, you're going to have to deal with taxes. You're going to have to be in poverty, or perhaps even worse than that. So that gets pretty bad along those lines. Now, what if I were to take you down memory lane, and let's imagine healthcare 20 years from now? Don't even think about the cost, because the cost is going to be tremendous. But here are some of the questions that I would have for you. How sick will you be? Will you have Alzheimer's? Will you have dementia? Will you have a stroke? Will you have cancer? Will you be in a nursing facility? Will you be receiving home health care? Will you be in an assisted living facility? Or will you be in a nursing home? What will the cost be? How will you pay for it? Who will take care of you? Did you do any long-term care planning for yourself and your immediate family members? If you're a husband and wife, you should be doing long-term care planning for the two of you. But how many of you are doing this? How many of your advisors are discussing these things with you on an ongoing basis? Probably very, very few. And if a few of your advisors are having these discussions with you, then don't leave them. Make sure that you cherish that relationship and that you act upon their recommendations, because they're 100% correct. But for the other 99% of you, none of your advisors are having these conversations with you. And by the time you figure it out 20 years from now, because you cannot predict a financial outcome, many of you come to my office for the first time, and Bert, in 20 years from now, I'm going to be okay because I'm going to have A, B, C, and D. And then I go, well, how will you determine a financial outcome? How will you know where taxes are going to be? How do you know what inflation is going to look like? How are you going to know what financial mistakes you've made along the way in a 20-year period? How will you know the cost of health care? How will you know whether you're going to be sick or not in 20 years from now? So, bottom line, in 20 years from now, unless you've done some planning, you will find yourself in international waters on a dinghy with no paddles. Now, what is the tax solution that I would give to all of you? Well, do you know what percentage of your standard deduction you're leaving on the table? Many of you won't know that. If you happen to be married filing jointly in 2020, the standard deduction is $24,800. But for many of you, you're going to be leaving most of that. You're going to be wasting most of that away because you won't know, what to do with that standard deduction. And if you're a single filer in 2020, the standard deduction is $12,400. So one of the questions that I have for you today is, can you execute a Roth conversion in 2020 and avoid taxes on the conversion altogether? By the way, the answer is yes, but how will you know? By the time you see your tax preparer in April, it will be too late. So a tax planning report can determine how much you can convert annually without paying federal income taxes on the conversion. But unless you do something about it, you're never going to know, and you're wasting your standard deduction away. So for those of you that may want to reach out to me, feel free to call me. I'll be more than happy to discuss what a tactical retirement blueprint can do for you and your family. You can call me at area code 786-766-1042. You can also reach out to me at Bert, B-E-R-T, at BertSalazar.com, BertSalazar.com. And always remember that my goal for you and your family is to kind of help you change the way that you see things, because when you change the way that you see things, the things that you see change. So once again, thank you very much for giving me a few minutes of your time, and I'll talk to you soon. Take care and have a great day. Bye-bye.